can just go?
Yep.
Am I sitting up straight?
You are.
Oh yes, very
Okay.
straight.
Very
As if
straight.
you had a board there.
Yeah, well, this is my mother, it's always saying, stand up straight.
Okay, well, welcome to
Thank
your
you.
endorsement interview where we figure out who we want to endorse.
Mhm.
It's just going to be you. So, I mean, just to get started, tell us a little bit about your district and why you're running.
Okay. Well, I live out in the Forest Grove area, which is in western Washington County, and my district covers Forest Grove, Cornelius, and Hillsborough, and then also rural areas which are would be the north and the south of all three of those cities, but primarily north and south of Forest Grove and Cornelius. And so we are a very unique, I believe, district that primarily has a wide variety of what I could say would be competing interests. We are constantly looking at the importance of our ag land and looking at the blessing of our water and our water system and our irrigation. We have high tech and Intel and other subconductor type businesses, and so constantly for resources we all need some of the same, and they're valuable and very prized, and so we are constantly working on making sure that all people have an ability to be successful and to actually have a life where they have a good job, a good place to live, and good schools for their kids.
Okay. Before I forget to ask you, how old are you going to be on October 17th?
Ask what?
How old are you going to be on October 17th?
On October 17th, I'll be the same age I am now, which is 73.
Okay.
Okay.
And you've been representing this district for 8 years now?
This is my 8th year. Yes,
This is
it's
your 8th year.
four
Okay.
terms almost under my belt.
What was what accomplishment during that time are you most proud of?
Well, it depends on what kind of accomplishments. So you need a definition there if we want to be real clear. But my accomplishment, as far as I'm concerned, is that I believe I work at trying to listen to a wide variety of voices in my communities. And I also believe that as a teacher, I have gone down and successfully gotten leadership positions for the budget in the education field, from early learning to higher education. And I've worked diligently on trying to make sure that we carried out a new vehicle at the state that was there as a brand new, let's set up an agency or let's set up a department that is going to be Education Advancement Council. And that Education Advancement Council is working on making sure that teachers have an active voice in decision making. Mm-hmm. And it works with superintendents, it works with classified and certified. And all of those folks really needed that support, especially in the last 2.5 to 3 years with the pandemic. So that I see as a high accomplishment. I also work on ag, land use, and water. I think those are important, and right now they're becoming more important every single day. And so I've been a vice chair of the ag and land use committees. We've added water back into that committee. I was one of the folks that worked on getting that to happen, because I think it's important for us to put all of those topics in one area and not have them as silos, but make sure that we're integrating the different resources and some of the needs, and especially for the reason that I told you, which is we've got competing interests, and it's important for us to make sure that everyone has a successful element there.
Does that put you at odds with other Democrats at the state, the competing interests, or when you talk about the competing interests, what are you referring to?
Competing interest has to do not with politics, but with competition for resources. And so again, we're talking water, we're talking land, we're talking the ability to use our transportation systems. We're making sure that we're actually serving a wide variety of people that live in our communities, whether it be making a very balanced transportation system that has buses in it, trains in it, the ability to get delivery vans to homes. We have to be able to have bike and ped and safe routes to school. And so those are areas that a lot of people, social justice, I'm a good vote. If you want to talk about health and health for all, I'm a good vote. But some of the work that I do is very detailed, and so you have to really get in and dig down and figure out what is it that will help in infrastructure, or what I call the spine of services in our community. What do all folks need, not just one type of person or one type of business, or really even one type of community.
I mean, I like what you're talking about. I mean, can you just give me more, can you give me a specifics about a specific, I don't want to say trade-off you had to make, but like a hard-fought victory you had to make? Or like, just give me your like favorite, biggest
my
one.
favorite trade-off. My favorite trade-off. Well, I'm going to use water, I guess, because we need water for semiconductor companies, and we also need water for good agriculture. I want my produce to be grown locally. I want my farmers to be successful, and so it's important that I figure out how to make that happen.
And how did you do that?
Primarily through good use of land and water and resources. One of the ways that I've done it is a statement, and maybe you think these are too general, but they basically are the framework for the work. And that is that when we talk about really needing to irrigate and needing to provide drinking water and needing to provide water for particular processes in industry, we have to talk about what the responsibility and what the pay, how much it's going to cost, and who's going to help be part of the solution for making sure we've got valid systems. And right now we're working on drinking water with a wide variety of folks in Western Washington County, but really between Wilsonville and Forest Grove, with the Willamette River system and the pipe and the system that we're pulling more water out of the Willamette River. We still need water for fish. So it's the urban city's responsibility to conserve water and to have good pathways for that and good education for their public on making sure that we're not wasting any urban water or drinking water and making choices.
You think Portland needs to be more conservative about their water usage, or?
Water usage in Portland is interesting. It's not my bailiwick necessarily, but it is interesting, and really and truly there are ways that I think we can all improve, including our big and small cities. Water conservation is from saving water brushing your teeth to not watering your lawn to making sure that you are doing laundry maybe once or twice a week and not every day. There's a wide variety of ways to do it, but
is there not enough water in your district as it stands right now?
Well, I mean, right now we're doing a good job because we plan long-term backup systems, and that system from the Willamette River is really one that we've been working on for over 10 years, 15 years, and so there's been a wide variety of people involved in that.
So there isn't currently a water shortage. Is there one approaching?
No. I mean, you think long-term for water, you think long-term for land, and you think it's something you can't recreate groundwater reserves. And so it's important you take care of the ones that you've got.
No, for sure, but I'm just asking, is there a shortage of water in your district?
Not at the present time.
Okay, but will there be at some point down the line, or, I mean, you're talking about competing interests who need water. Is there a point where that's going to become a point of tension?
I would say yes.
Let's talk about like right now. Like if you're going in, you win first, whatever, 180 days, whatever
What
people
now?
call it. Like if you win and what is the first thing you're going to fight for? Like what's the biggest policy change you want to see?
Well, right now, as a co-chair of the Joint Transportation Committee and a co-chair of the I-5 Bridge Committee, and working on some of the other committees that I've just told you about in ag and natural resources and water, it's infrastructure.
Okay.
And absolutely right now, one of the biggest projects that we've got going is the bi-state legislative committee between Washington State and Oregon, which I know you folks know about and have opinions on. And there are a lot of folks that have been working on that, and I will continue to do it. I've been doing it for 2.5 years, and we have a very large year in front of us. The state of Washington has put $1 billion toward a replacement of the I-5 bridge, and we are working in 2023 to make a matching $1 billion commitment from the Oregon legislature. There are a lot of people with different ideas and opinions, and my job is to keep them at the table talking and finding a solution for that. We're going for $2.4 $2.4 billion of federal dollars and federal grants, both competitive grants and large grants in places like the bridge area, and then also in Connecting Community. Connecting Community, I know you guys care about Portland, is really important to the Rose Quarter project and also important to the Albina community, and is specifically important because it's working on making a what I would call a modernization of a infrastructure package be really attuned to the neighborhood around them, trying to make sure that we're reconnecting that neighborhood that has had problems with an I-5 going, through parts of it. Mm-hmm. So what am I working on? I don't necessarily work on bills all the time. I work on large projects and large pieces of legislature that we carry out with services and infrastructure. As far as a personal bill, I have one, and it's going to be a bill that's on newborn testing. It's a newborn testing lab bill. I've had two other bills on this topic. We're almost 2/3 of the way through trying to improve our new lab processes. There are a lot of genetic diseases that babies don't always have tested at birth, and if they're not tested at birth, then they can't be treated. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the treatment comes in the first 40 to 45 days of their birth. And so that is a bill that I'm working on, and I'm working hard with Oregon Health Association, also the newborn lab new director. But it's an important bill, and a lot of parents care about it. We have a lot of children in Oregon that are tested in our labs, and some of them have lost children by the age of 5 because they couldn't be treated.
Mm-hmm. If we could loop back to the I-5 replacement bridge real quick.
The what now?
The I-5 replacement bridge.
Sure.
So I know a big thing, in the past couple years is how do we get the federal funding for this project? And, some lawmakers, and I don't remember who it was, but said, we're going to need it to be light rail, or we're not going to get federal funding. Where do you stand on what you hope that will look like and what you think is feasible?
Well, first of all, let's talk about light rail. You had a lot in that question, but as far as light rail, I've been working on light rail since 1991, and when I was a Metro councilor, I helped with the airport light rail, I helped with the Hillsborough light rail, and actually 3 spokes of the system itself, so I do favor light rail. Light rail has an uphill battle right now as far as riders and all of that that has swirled around the pandemic. So as I was coming in today, checking the train out on the way in, because I really feel it's important for us to do education on how it's healthy, when it's healthy to ride buses, both the fast buses and rapid buses, and then also the trains. So where I stand on it is, yes, there is still money available in the federal package, the new infrastructure package for transit. And yes, that's some money we're going after. Mm-hmm. I do believe that is, we want the kind of funding we need. We do need transit, but we don't just need transit. So we're also looking at their, I've already told you about one of them, Reconnect Communities. We want that bridge to reconnect communities, and so we're working really hard on looking at how and where people live and where they work. And so we're going to be looking for any dollars that will help us give a wide variety of choices, mm-hmm. whether it be a bus, whether it be a train, or whether it be an automobile. We're hoping those automobiles are electrified. Mm-hmm. So we're looking for a lot of federal dollars out of that package for the stations, and for basically trying to figure out how to use a wide variety of resources, from hydrogen buses, and there's other money for different types of greener fuel. Mm-hmm. So we're looking for all of it.
Has the state applied for that funding yet?
We've already started our applications. Okay. Some of the applications are due now, some are due in the future. We've had the federal government ask us to actually try and get an early start on a couple of them. We've put in for $750 million for planning for the bridge. We've also put in and are working on a grant that has to do with further definition of what I just gotten done saying is connecting mm-hmm. our infrastructure with community. And so we're working on that one. And there's another $750 million one that has more to do with construction and buying, that they're encouraging us to get started on it. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we're working diligently on getting that $2.4 billion that we think is available for a project like ours.
In that application, are you guys advertising this as light rail, or are you just advertising it as a replacement bridge?
Well, right now we have, and I know you know this, a locally preferred alternative. And yes, the locally preferred alternative, which was okayed by all 8 partners involved, 4 on both sides of the river, okayed having transit go to Vancouver up to at least Evergreen. There are some who would like to see it go to the community college. Will we help them with that as part of this working together? Yes, we will. And we're really working on trying to make sure that Oregon is learning and TriMet is learning more about their rapid bus system, and that they are learning more about our successes and challenges with the transit that we have on our side of the river. So we're learning and working together as partners.
And you said total you guys are searching for 2.4 billion from the feds?
2.4 is what we think is possible.
Okay.
And besides, the 1 billion from Washington, 1 billion from Oregon, 2.4 potential from the federal government, we are also looking at congestion management and tolling. Now, congestion management and tolling is a really interesting conversation. And it will be a type of congestion management or tolling that is really looking at low-income families and is looking at BIPOC communities and is making sure that we are not going to have folks at one end of our income scale not be able to get where they need to be. So we will look for alternatives, and we also will look to make sure that we can stage the costs. And because we have information, and because of our technology era that we're in, there's a lot of possibilities and ways for that to happen.
And then just one last question about bridge budget. So
sure.
1 billion from Washington. If you guys pledge 1 billion from Oregon, and then you get 2.4 billion from the feds, 4.4 billion. Is that enough to build the bridge, or is that just kind of a starting point?
I would say that is where you are probably on the low end of the cost right there.
Okay.
And it is one of those things that, again, we can talk about, and I'll come back. If you want to talk more about this, you call me up. I'll give you a phone number. I'll give you a phone number. But the point is that what we're trying to do right now is, this is business as usual. This is a mega project. This is not an unusual process. What you do is you scope and you estimate cost, you scope, you estimate, and then you start engineering, and you design and you estimate, and it's an ongoing process. And we have to have all kinds of what I would call reality checks on specifically the kind of 100% design we're looking for and what we can afford.
And do you guys have a current cost estimate, or is it too soon to?
November is going to be when we have our next. Our committees right now have been meeting once a month. We even did that during our session last year. But our next 2 bridge meetings will be October 31st and December 12th.
Got it. Okay.
So those will be the bi-state meetings.
Got it.
You talked earlier about like the large semiconductor companies you guys have out there. Like, given like we're in this very confusing kind of economic times, like what are you hearing from them as something they need?
Who am I hearing from?
Like from the large companies out in, you talk about the semiconductor companies.
Well, I mean, there's a wide variety of businesses in our state. We're very fortunate that way. Right now, that there's a big study that came out of the big semiconductor group that met under Wyden and Brown and Maria Pope. But it's one of those things where we're hearing that they need support. They need to be able to grow. They need to have some ability to feel as if infrastructure can be provided. They strongly want to make sure that they have a future wherever they are coalescing their larger business circles and suppliers. So, I mean, there wasn't anything new there. The pandemic has caused issues. I hear a lot about supply chain. I hear a lot about global issues that have to do with supply chain. I think that what we're hearing right now as far as economic hard times is they need to be nimble, and that they're remaking themselves. It used to be you would remake yourself for a generation, or you would make yourself for 5 to 10 years. They're talking about their businesses changing, yearly, changing in large ways, whether it be workforce. Workforce is another big issue. I work a lot on education because of my budget work, and the 200 million plus that we put into workforce was well accepted and well received, and a wide variety of businesses businesses from trades to high tech are all using those workforce funds to help make sure they've got the kind of workers that they need and future workers and to fill gaps. So those
Can
are
you give
just,
me a specific example of how that's working? The filling gap, like, I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is like this workforce education issue. Like, I'm interested in how the state is, really helping these
as
companies.
a teacher for 42 years,
Yeah.
and also somebody that really believes that you don't need to go to college to be successful, you need to be trained well, and you need to have a job that's going to be there in the future, or at least give you skills that you can find another job if it's not there in the future. And so how it's working is that we're working with schools, we're working with community colleges, we're working with business and industry. An example, if you go to Columbia County, which I've been involved for 6 years on some of the dollars and some of the work that we've done with PCC to connect industry with trades and training, and there's a big facility out there. If you haven't visited, it's really interesting. And it's one of those that, again, you bring in your K-12, you bring in your community colleges, and you bring in industry, and you get all three of those, legs of the stool together to figure out how do we get kids interested, how do we train them, how do we pay for it in a way that they don't have ungodly, types of loans to pay back. And whether it be training or whether it be college education, we're working on all of that. How does it work is you listen to your industry and figure out what they need for either trained workers or for educated workers, and you make sure that you're investing in those institutions to get that done.
And you're confident it's working? I see in these industries.
I am confident that in the last 8 years that I've been here,
Yeah.
that it is 150% better than it was when I showed up.
Is that an actual number, or is that
150% better as far as number of dollars, 150% better as far as partnering, and we're seeing kids who are excited about the programs. So do I think it's better? Do I think it's working? Yes, I do.
Yeah, I mean, another thing I want to touch on. I mean, your opponent's not here, so I can't play you two against each other, unfortunately. But your opponent has talked a lot about the issues with the mental health system, and Washington. You guys are in Washington County. I'm not.
We're in Washington County,
Washington
and behavioral health. You're giving me a background, okay?
Okay, no. So
Where
I'm
am I
saying,
going?
like, your DA is very upset about what's some of the changes that are making at Oregon State Hospital, and I'm wondering what you feel like. Give me a letter grade for the state right now in how it is handling the mental health care crisis.
C.
Okay, why C?
It's a C, definitely, because it's such a big problem that there is just no way to solve it with a magic pill. And so you have to do the hard work, and there has been a difference of opinion of what it means to serve that community, a community that has behavioral health, mental illness, or addiction. And those are all pieces of that. You can have some mental health issues and you end up with addiction problems, or vice versa on some elements of mental health conditions. And there's a wide variety of them.
I mean, honestly, a C seems like a pretty high grade for a state that's either the worst.
I'm going to tell you why it's
second
not a
worst.
high grade.
For a state that's the worst. or
We're
the
surprised
second
it's not
worst.
lower.
I'm going to say that I gave it a C. I don't think C is a good grade, number one. And number two,
I guess why aren't we an F?
Yeah,
Why
I
don't
mean,
you
it
think
just
we're
seems
an
like
F?
that's fairly high.
I think that we're not an F, because if you honestly want to take some time and go back and look at it, you go back over the last 8 to 10 years on the different places we are putting behavioral health and mental health dollars. Before it was always, we're going to put it in institutions. And so, but then people didn't like institutions. They didn't like the state hospital. They didn't like institutions that were statewide. They wanted to go to the philosophy of, let's go to community halfway houses, and let's go to community wraparound services.
Yeah.
And so the first group, we put money into the institutions. Then the state, and I wasn't there, but then the state put money into the halfway houses and the community activity. We discovered we need both. And sometimes when you're not maintaining both, so I think that the institutions took some hints and didn't get some maintenance and didn't get enough staff and didn't have all the things that they needed because they were being pushed toward the community. Now we've got a whole new set. We've got a set of schools. We're putting behavioral health dollars into our school system. So we've got schools to maintain in behavioral health dollars. We've got community halfway houses and services, and then we've got institutions that have been woefully neglected for a while.
So do you support, increasing the number of beds at Oregon State Hospital?
I do.
How many more
I
do you
do
want?
not know how many beds, and this is not my area, so you need one of my peers on this one. I don't sit on any health committee.
Okay.
I deal with research and I deal with detail, and so if you want, I'll go find out, but I honestly don't have a bed number.
Okay, I mean, going back to your constituents, what do you think, businesses aside, what do you think people are really worried about in your district right now?
Homelessness.
Okay.
I have worked hard for the last 5 years on what we call a Western Washington County group of nonprofits, faith communities, and government to try and figure out how to at least serve better folks that are on the streets or in terrible conditions. And I am really pleased with one element of that work. When at the beginning we kept saying we needed a shelter, and I kept saying we don't want to keep them in shelters forever. What are you talking about? We can't just shelter. We need a system. So we need to shelter the ones that are in terrible camps or on the streets, but then we need to bridge housing. And so I used my I used my ARPA dollars in the last 2 years to help this group buy the Forest Grove Inn, which is a motel that we turned in, the turnkey program. Mm-hmm. And so there's a bridge housing. So we're moving camps, and we're cleaning up camps, and we're serving camps with all kinds of services that have to do with some nonprofits that I'm involved with. So we've got the shelter, we've got the bridge, and now I got to go to an opening finally to the third piece, which is the stable housing. And we opened Valfrey out in Forest Grove, and if you haven't been there, you've got to go. And it was so exciting. We moved 3 people out of the camps into the turnkey motel bridge housing. We moved 3 families out of the bridge housing into Valfrey. I felt excited.
What dollars was used to build the Valfrey?
The Valfrey is some of those are Metro dollars.
Okay. SHS dollars or the housing bond?
It came through Washington County, but okay. It's a lot of the bond money. Sure. And state money. We have state money in it too. I mean, there's all kinds of money in it. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I was excited. So they care about unaffordable, okay, that's one. The other one that, I hear a lot about because I'm a woman that supported it, but choice. And it's one of those situations where, I've been asked by people that hadn't been asked before some of the decisions that have been made in the last couple of years nationally as well as locally in different states on, are we going to protect those choice rights? And it's an easy answer for me. So I have 2 daughters, and I've been a choice supporter from the whole time I've been in public office.
Is there a project you're working on right now that you're most excited about?
A project. You say project, and I think mega project. So let's talk about that, think about that. A project. Well, between education, affordable housing, and infrastructure, I'm pretty busy. But as far as a project, I'm working right now, I guess I would call it volunteer, and I'm basically working on still being a speech and debate coach, and I judge, and I took a kid to nationals this summer. And I worked through Glencoe because that was the place where I taught the longest. But I'm really working on trying to bring a positive attitude to young people about public service. And I'm working on that through my interns in my office. I had 4 interns last fall. Right now, I've started my first intern just within the last 2 weeks. But I think it's really important for people of my generation to really give some help and support to people that have been around the last 3 years in a very chaotic time between a pandemic, a lot of violence, gun control and gun safety and sensible protection for our kids, our communities, is something that I really care about, and they care about it too. And so working with interns and working with young people in a wide variety of ways that basically talk about environment, talk about safety and gun legislation, talk about things that they care about, which is diversity of experience and diversity of population, and having experiences that I've had in my life because of the different BIPOC communities that I've been involved with has a meaning to me that I'm excited about. Mm-hmm. That's something that's been lifelong. It's not necessarily political. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
What do you see as your biggest failure as a legislator so
Say
far?
that again, because I want to understand your question.
Yeah, what do you see as your biggest failure as a legislator over the past 8 years?
I think sometimes I can become too passionate, and because I do believe that if you are in policy, you have to be calm, you have to be steady, and you cannot let your passion allow you not to listen to a voice that you might feel is different than your voice.
Can you give us a specific example of when you feel like your passion got in the way?
I would say that that probably, if I was looking at Metro years, there was a time where I felt like preserving green space for parks and open space was absolutely the most important. We ended up succeeding. So the actual, activity and the actual subject area was successful. But I had 2 or 3 different, situations where I met with people that were absolutely offended that we would buy land and it would become always public land. They were offended. And they were good people, and we did have things that we were in common with. Some of them were property owners that didn't want to see public land around them. Some of them were folks that felt like they wanted more opportunity for land to be future business land. So they came from different perspectives, but there were a couple of conversations that I had that it took like a month or more for me to recover and be able to really communicate and have good conversations with people I needed in my bailiwick to be able to make it successful, whether it was a bond measure or whether it was something that we were actually buying. Mm-hmm. But I think that was a failure. But I learned how to control that passion, and that was a learning experience in my first elected position, and it was near the beginning of that position. At the state level, as far as legislative level, it always seems to be around land use. I don't know why. But I used to spend hours and hours visiting. When I was at Metro, I was on the land use committee for years, and I visited, property owners. And so when I went to the state, they knew that I was one of the only people at the state level that actually had some understanding of the land use law. And so I ended up being in some places one of the only bills that I voted against for my caucus, I voted against my caucus, mm-hmm. was a land use bill from Bend. And I worked well with those people in Bend, but they ignored me just a little on what I thought their land use law and their UGB expansion should be. And so there was a little bit of roughness for 6 months, probably a term and a half, not a term and a half, probably a year, maybe a year. And it was one of those things where I voted no. And I said, I'm not saying you don't need land. I think you're making the wrong choice. I think you asked my opinion, didn't take my advice, which is fine, but I'm not voting for it. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of a big deal because I'd worked with those folks very successfully.
Mm-hmm. Lucas, anything else?
You asked me a question. It was a long answer, but
I think that makes sense. Just going back, I feel like you're passionate about education. I feel like we touched it briefly with like the sort of apprenticeship concept, but like, are there other issues you see with, the education systems, or like, what else do you really want to see change when it comes to education?
There's a couple of things that, have annoyed my sensibilities, okay? Constantly people are talking about graduation rates. Mm-hmm. And I have never felt that there has been an honest conversation about why graduation rates are different between states. And so I would really like to see some work done on explaining to general public and to parents that may have some questions on the fact that Oregon has 24 credits, where some of the states you can graduate from high school with 13, 15, 16, 17, in that range. And so we have always had more responsibility for the student to get a even plain or regular graduation diploma. The second thing is that they always look at testing, and they are standardized tests to also say how much a student knows. I don't think that's the most valid way to do it because of a wide variety of conditions that students have and different ways that they have to learn. So one of the things that I think needs to be done is an understanding of what is the myths and the facts about the education system in the state of Oregon.
So you think it sounds like what you're saying is you think the state is doing better than we give it credit, than it's given credit for.
I think we can always improve, and I'm working on that, and I'll tell you about that if you want some goals there. But I do think that it's a misunderstood. Everybody went to school. Everybody's had a child or a friend or a niece or a nephew in school. They all think they're experts on that particular area. And I think that the folks that are working so hard, which are the teachers and the classified and the principals, are working so diligently as a team, and many times they feel disrespected. And the disrespect is what the problem is. The disrespect, you can always want to have, teachers that are fresh, have different standards of teaching styles for different students, but to say they're not doing their job to me is criminal.
Well, you're really going to hate this question then. So what do you think about the trade-off that was made during the pandemic, given what we know now about the loss in learning over the period the schools were shut down?
So are you saying to me, what would I have done different
Yes.
with the schools?
Would you have done anything different?
There's two pieces to that, and you can do what you want with it. But first of all, a pandemic is an emergency, and there is nobody in a leadership position that was ready to handle a pandemic. And so, number one, I wouldn't give $1 million. I wouldn't have taken $1 million to be the governor of this state during the pandemic. So I want you to understand, I think all leaders were challenged. But if I could have changed anything for the schools, it would have been not change everything constantly over and over again, because the teachers and the administrators, the classified and the students got worn out. They just couldn't keep track of it. And even if it was, businesses, I think the schools took a worse hit than business, because you're dealing with emotionally fragile, different age development children. You're dealing with teachers and schools that had to be online, had to be doing one-on-one, and they did it in a lot of different ways that they never did it before, and they had to be then back in the classroom all at the same time. And so it was an absolute, and if I could have done anything to take away some of that stress or some of that depth of...
Wait, so I'm sorry, what would you have done?
How I would have done it, okay, what I tried to do and what I would have done more of would be to be able to give the wraparound services that some of the students and the teachers needed. Some of it was behavioral health. Mm-hmm. We started it. We got as much as we could in as quickly as we could, but they were honestly going through some really stressful times and were having some really hard times of coping. Mm-hmm. And that was something that if I could have done something, I would have. I felt like we did do as much as we could with the dollars that we had, both ARPA and federal as well as state dollars that we actually put in that was from our general fund.
Would you have brought back kids into the classroom faster than the governor did?
I personally am also not a doctor. So, I don't have the medical degree to say I should have or should not have. We brought them back as quickly as we could, and I was one of the voices that said, you've got to get them back in the classroom as quickly as it's safe to do so.
Because, a lot of people have said we could have gotten them in sooner and safer. We could have stayed, we could have kept them safe, and we could have gotten them in 4 months earlier.
If you know how to do that, I wish you'd share it, because...
Well, if you say you'd give $1 million to be governor, like she was in that
No, I
decision
wouldn't
making.
do it. I said I wouldn't take $1
Oh, you
million.
wouldn't take
I got
$1
you.
million.
I got
Okay,
you.
okay.
Wouldn't take $1
I
million
understand.
My question is
I'm sorry.
No one wants to have made that
And if you
decision.
know, if you have the answer to that question, I think you should get it out there, because to be honest, I think they tried the best they could, but it's one of those situations where I think that it was the balance between what is the public responsibility and what is the parent responsibility. Those were the conflicts that we were dealing with. Folks that were willing to send their kids without, vaccinations. Folks that were not willing to send their kids if they had kids in school in their room that didn't have a vaccination. So we're dealing with both groups that are saying we're not sending them.
Do you support increased funding for schools?
Do I what?
Support increased state funding for schools?
Do I support more funding for schools?
Yeah. Should we spend more state dollars on schools than we do now?
We have spent more state dollars every single year I've been there, and yes,
So continue to spend more.
we need to spend it well, and we need to spend it with, transparency, and make sure that we've got a way to test that we're getting what we
But you just said you
asked
don't like
for.
testing, so how do you want to check? How do you want to test?
I'm not testing them like.
Well, no, I'm serious. How if you want to spend
now,
more
now
money,
you've
how
got a
would you-
half an hour question that I can work on
Oh,
for
I'm
you.
just
but,
getting started.
this half an hour question is on how we actually we give money to the districts. We give money to nonprofits. We give money to, a wide variety of ages, from early learning now in child care all the way up to, post-graduation at the high level, the higher education level, and through HEC. And so the situation is, we've got to make sure that they are spending the money, number one, and we can do this through school bookkeepers and business managers, and also the same kind of folks at our higher education. We have to make sure they're spending the money on specifically what we set the money aside to do. So how we do that is we do things like, basically the Student Success Act. We have pots of money. We have 3 pots of money in that particular legislation. And we said this pot of money can be spent for this type of thing. One of them happened, by the way, to be behavioral health. This pot of money can be spent for X, Y, or Z, diversity and BIPOC supports. So what you do is you target your money, you target your investment, and then you check on them. We have a Department of Education. We have a wide variety of ways to do that through reports. I'd like simple reports, but we can do that. So.
Do you think we are checking?
Yeah.
I mean, do we have?
Oh, yes.
And what does it look like? Is it good? Is it
Right
bad?
now, there's nobody giving them a report card, and we haven't necessarily put out a report, but you go back and look at some of the audits that have been done in the last 5 years on schools, you will find that we have, 197 different school districts, and so you're going to find some differences between your large and your small, your urban and your rural, and so what we're doing is we're taking those reports that they're giving us, and we are trying to see where we're getting success and better results in different ways. It's not always testing. Sometimes it's in basically what kind of what we would call to be, they used to call them soft skills, and now they're calling them, there's something else, I can't remember the jargon, but it's basically how are they functioning as human beings, healthy human beings, and we're looking at our health records and looking at our data and our information about how well they seem to be functioning in different elements of jobs and that type of thing. We have a data system that we've been working on at the state for 15 years.
Yeah. So going back to the accountability piece a little bit, are you saying the state does have robust oversight over how school districts are spending their dollars, or do you think not?
I am saying that it's getting better and better every single budget.
Okay.
I'm not going to give it a grade. You don't like my C's. So I personally believe that every single budget that I've worked on and every single budget I've voted on since I've been at the state, we have had more in the way of the ability to see how the money's being spent, because we're asking for it. Mm-hmm. Now, DAS has some areas to ask when we contract. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to do it.
So this is overlap between 2 things we talked about. How are you going, really, again, I just really want specifics. How would you solve the teacher shortage crisis right now?
Well, I've been on 5 subcommittees this interim working specifically on that as one of the major areas, and it's come out on the top 3 of what everybody wants to work on. We're working on different pathways, and not pathways that are not training or education, but we're working on apprenticeship as one of the pathways that we can use for teaching. We're getting a lot of real interest and support in that, and we're looking at other states to see how they're doing the apprenticeship program. We're looking at what the federal government requires to be an official apprenticeship program in different sectors, and we're going to include that in the teaching sector because there are actually federal dollars that go along with that. So apprenticeship is our number 1, I think, idea. Mm-hmm. The pathway for getting into like a state compact. A state compact is like a group of 8 states, let's say 8 states, and they're all saying, we all certify teachers, and we seem to have a lot in common in our certification process, so we're going to approve and become part of this compact, and we will recognize your certification if you come for a job in Oregon from that state. So compacts are important. Besides different pathways, we're looking at some pathways that also have to do with stronger education program mentorship. And we have mentorship that has been statewide. We've had mentorship that came from our ESDs. We've had mentorships that have been school specific. And so we're looking at mentorships and looking at the different programs and looking at a way that state can give them the goals and say, I don't care what kind of a mentorship program you have. You've got to connect with and produce for these types of goals of support for beginning teachers and also teachers along the pathway to improving their skills as they go forward with different types of development, all kinds of professional development. So that's another way that we're
How consistent of your support has been for raising teacher salaries?
There has been support for it, but it's the hardest thing on the list.
Why is it so hard?
Well, first of all, because you're a local school district or a local school state. Mm-hmm. Oregon has always been, decisions for schools should be community decisions. And so when you start talking about a state minimum for beginning teacher salary, and that's the one idea that we've had more support than anything else, mm-hmm. was that if we could start with the beginners and give them a reason to want to come into the teaching profession, then why not? Mm-hmm. And so it's still on the list of looking at teaching salary and looking at how the state could be involved and not lose local control. They don't want preemption, they want local control. Mm-hmm. They have school boards, they have, business folks at that level that they want it to reflect their community.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I could go on this forever. You gotta get out of here.
No, I mean, I feel pretty good about it if you do.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so we have one fun question that we always wrap up with. It's not that fun, but if the world were ending tomorrow and you could have a last food, not a meal, a food, what would that food be?
Blueberries.
Oh. Blueberries? Oh, that's like the healthiest. We've heard pizza, we've heard
strawberries this morning. I like that.
They're my very favorite.
Really? Of all the things you could eat?
I love blueberries. We've got the best blueberries.
I was gonna say, isn't that like a thing?
I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to be. I didn't mean to ask you your questions over again, but I always want to make sure.
No, of course, yeah.
I talk really fast and I'm not so.
But I just want to make sure I understand your question.
Yeah, of course.
My answer has no meaning if I haven't answered your question.
No, I felt your answer your question. So, no,
well, thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
We're bummed your opponent couldn't be here.
Yeah.
That would have made it a little more fun, but that's all right. Yeah.